Welcome back, PM peeps, to PM Corner. No, it's been a hot minute, but things happen in life, and that's just how things work. But nonetheless, we are back to our usual, I guess, schedule or programming or whatever it is you want to call. So today's particular video slash podcast is going to be a little different than what we normally do, just because of the fact that this topic was pretty hot for a good bit. Um, Now, of course, there is some controversy with it, I guess, to some degree, and people have their opinions. But for the sake of this particular video slash podcast, we're only going to look at it from a project management perspective and just a professional perspective in general. Now, of course, if you do like the content that you watch slash listen to, please feel free to subscribe to us on Twitter, YouTube, and or Spotify. We do have a Twitch account, but we're going to take a pause on that for a little bit. And we also do have a Patreon and PayPal for any donations if you would so choose. But we would just like a good subscriber, just to come and enjoy our content together and maybe learn a few things or two or none, or just to listen just for some entertainment. Now, of course, I will say that the topic particularly is, of course, about OceanGate. Now, of course, what started all this? Well, at first, I was not going to talk about this particular subject, and I was kind of waiting it out to see what would happen, what were the results, and then kind of do like a combo where I talked about the Titanic and I talk about the Titan. Kind of like what I did with nuclear bunkers of history, where I talked about three different types of bunkers. But then this particular post on LinkedIn caught my attention. So, for those of you that are just listening on Spotify, I will read this out to you in kind of like a short summary in an essence. And then for those of you that are watching on YouTube, you will see the whole post. Now, I did block out the person's name and so forth because just to be a little more respectful. But and this pertains to all information that's discussed. If you would like my sources to just look at where I found this information from, I would be more than happy to provide that. Um, and then, of course, you can just go and look for yourself. So here's what this particular LinkedIn post said. OceanGate Titan submarine disaster, which happened on June 18th, 2023, highlights the importance of communication, risk management, adherence to procedures, and having a clear understanding of the project scope in project management. So, of course, the first one they list is communication. Communication is essential for ensuring that all stakeholders are aware of the project's progress and any potential problems. Okay, we're going to get to that in a minute. Risk management is also essential for project success. All projects have risk, and it is important to identify and assess these risks early on. 3, adherence to procedures is also critical for project success. All projects have procedures in place for a reason, and it's important to follow these procedures to ensure the safety and success of the project. 4, having a clear understanding of the project scope is also important for project success. The scope of a project defines the work that needs to be done to complete the project. Now, this post kind of it made me go, "Huh? What? What are you talking about?" And here's where I begin with this. So let's start off with first communication. Now, the whole paragraph I didn't read, and I mean, just to be honest, like this, in my opinion, misses the ballpark 100%. But no adding at the person who posted this, but in my mind, it misses the park. So, communication, this wasn't about stakeholders. This wasn't about investors. This wasn't about anything else but one man's ego and wanting to be a pioneer in all of this, right? Because, and we'll get into it too when we talk about the real deal about the OceanGate Titan, is that this guy really had a vision. And While I'm not going to say that no one is not allowed to have dreams or hopes or vision, whatever. This guy, he's a very different case, in my opinion. The risk management, first and foremost, we already know these risks. Do we know all the risks of going underwater? No. Do we know a good fair amount of those risks to know what would happen? Yup. And we'll get into that too. Adherence to procedures is one where I kind of have to say this wasn't about procedures. This was adherence to industry regulations. Now, I was going to try and play a video, but I can't seem to get it recorded. But it was basically all over TikTok with this guy who interviewed Stockton Rush, and he went into the sub to see what it does and got a little tour, and there was one part that I really wanted to play, but I couldn't get it to record the sound included. It was strange. But anyways, the point was is that this guy read that the OceanGate Titan had not been approved by any regulatory body. Now, regulatory bodies means that there is standards in place. It's the same with cybersecurity. There are standards in place. Does that mean you have procedures from the industry body? No. You have standards, meaning you have to make sure that your security system meets these following items on a checklist, right? Or these following best practices. How you do it is not up to them, it's up to you. But as long as those procedures you place or put in place, I should say, meet those standards, then that's different. But this is not adherence to procedures. Like the Titan, they already knew what people had done in the past. And you're going to see what I'm talking about in a minute when I get there. But of course, we're going to talk about Stockton Rush like super quick. Then afterwards is having a clear understanding of project scope. First and foremost, again, they knew what the scope was. That this is not a scope issue. This was not at all a scope issue. And we'll talk about why these four items listed are not really the real problem or the real root as to why this event took place. But of course, before we get to that, we got to look at the guy's face. Now, again, for those of you that are just watching on the podcast or listening on the podcast, I should say, not watching, we are showing Stockton Rush's face. So this guy, just really briefly, as I said before, he had interest in deep sea exploration because even as a child, according to one source, he had an interest in aviation and space travel. He even had got a commercial pilot license at 18. But he eventually became more interested in undersea exploration. And what he thought was a potential probability of creating a whole new commercial industry of underwater exploration. Why was this? Because he tried to purchase a submarine, his own personal submarine. And he discovered that he wasn't able to because there were fewer than 100 privately owned submarines worldwide. And there's kind of a reason for that. Like, there's a lot of maintenance that comes to subs. There's a lot of things you got to do in order to, maintain it, make sure it's, unsinkable to some degree, at least in certain circumstances, right? That's able to handle certain pressures at certain depths, etc., etc. But what this guy did is he went, I got a big brain idea, and that is to make this a commercialized effort. So this guy wanted to be a pioneer. He didn't want to just do it for the sake of it. He wanted to be a pioneer and create what really isn't a demand, because I think a lot of us don't really want to go underwater. Let's be honest. I think a lot of us have watched enough Shark Week to know a few things. Um, but this guy was creating a demand to go underwater and deep sea exploration. And of course, particularly go see the Titanic, which, of course, who to some degree, in my opinion, and I'll briefly put that in, is that some people really want to see it. In my mind, yes, it would be cool, but at the same time, I would find myself kind of saying, maybe not. That's where a lot of people died, and I would rather leave that at peace, right? Some people, they just want to see it because, everyone's still concerned of how quickly it's decaying and all that fun jazz, which it is decaying pretty quickly. Um, but at the same time, you know, it is something that we should continue to remember, continue to talk about, because again, we all learned from history, which leads into the real root of the issue is that this wasn't, again, a communication issue, a risk management issue, a scope issue, or a procedure adherence issue. This was a ignoring lessons learned issue. That's the first thing. We had plenty of people before this guy even going down there, just even deep sea exploration in the first place. I mean, we have the US Navy, we have the Russian Navy, we have all these naval military types that have had submarines. So we already have lessons learned from all this. I mean, come on. One of the things that we also have lessons learned from is sinkings. And according to one source, and this really got my blood boiling because this definitely told me this guy does not care about others. It says here in 2019, Stockton Rush, expressed the view that the Passengers Vessel Safety Act of 1993, which basically is setting the standard of how vessels like submarines, submersibles, ships, how you need to be ready for any kind of disasters. I'm kind of summarizing it and probably butchering it to some degree, but just plain terms, this is about keeping people safe when they're out on the ocean or out in a body of water on a vessel, whether it's a ship, a submarine, a submersible, whatever. And here he says that the Vessel Safety Act of 1993 needlessly prioritized passenger safety over commercial innovation. All right there. Big problem. I mean, I don't know why people don't Google anymore, like or ever, because if people had found this quote, which I could find very easily, people would have thought twice about going on this guy's submersible. Like even if I had all the money in the world, if I found that this guy did not really view that passenger safety was as important as commercial innovation, it would have been an immediate no for me. In addition to this, it then says building on earlier assertions, including statements on their official website, right, the OceanGate website, which noted in 2011 that since 1974, there has not been a serious injury or fatality on an ABS certified passenger submersible. Again, why people don't Google things, I will never know. I will never understand. Not one bit. Because I Googled, you know, sunken ships, 21st century sinkings, as you can see on the screen for those of you that are watching the YouTube video. For those of you that are not, that's what we're showing here on the screen. I'm just going to read a few for you, just to give you some perspective, because these sinkings include submarines, ferries, boats, you name it, and these are not just in the U.S. This is all over the world. Okay, first one in 2000 was in Indonesia. It was and I'm butchering this name, as a Kaya Bahri, however you pronounce that. So of course on the 29th of June 2000. An overloaded ferry carrying refugees from the Maluku Islands sank in a storm, and 481 passengers out of the 491 passengers died. No, not convincing enough. Okay, hold on. 2000, again, August 12th, 2000, Russian Navy. They had a submarine, which was one of the Russian Navy's most advanced vessels. sank in the Barents Sea and lost all 118 people on board. And it was an explosion of fuel from a old torpedo that caused the disaster. But that's still a submarine, by the way. Still a submarine sinking. Okay, not convincing enough either. Let's find we got one in Greece, September 26, 2000. Ferry hit a reef and sank. 82 people died. Indonesia, 2001, a boat carrying 400 asylum seekers to Australia sank October 19th, 2001. 353 people lost. Let's see. We got a cargo ship on January 1st, 2001 in Georgia, off of Antalya, Turkey. 54 people died. I mean, that's just in 2000 and 2001. Okay. I don't think I need to go any further on this. So making statements like that is blatantly ignoring lessons learned. I mean, the Titan itself was going to go visit a ship that sunk. And you're saying there hasn't been any serious injury or fatality? And I know it does mention certified passenger submersibles, but let's be a little honest. Overall, there's risks. Like everyone knows this, right? And to continue on harping the lessons learned, this dude also had plenty of other submersible examples. I mean, right here, you got underwater research vehicles. So, of course, you had to not tell me that you didn't research these guys to see what kind of materials maybe they used, how much pressure can each of them handle. I mean, you got this one from Boeing. I don't know which one is from, but it was another example. This green one right here is the James Cameron submersible, which I remember watching an interview with James Cameron. He said that when he made his submersible, only he and his engineer could run this submersible. And of course, James Cameron, I think he reached like the Mariana Trench or something like that. Don't quote me on that. Obviously, also correct me if I misspoke. But again, this guy understood the dangers of going underwater. I mean, you're talking really, really crazy things could happen down there. And as I said, there's a lot of known unknowns, right? We know of known risks, but there's also unknowns that we don't know about. And it's because we just can't reach those depths. And we try to, but there's again the unknown unknowns of going further are unknown unknowns for a reason. Like we just haven't gotten there. But let's take a look at the Titan itself, right? Now, this is on the screen. Oh, yeah, I meant to say for those that are just listening on the Cut podcast, the previous slide, we were showing the different types of submersibles to give an understanding of different lessons learned that Stockton Rush could have taken from. And now we're presenting I don't know, I guess it's like a flyer of showing how the Titan looks. Because there's an important piece to this as part of lessons learned is that first and foremost, we know about oceanic pressure and depth. Okay. Now I'm going to kind of flip between the Titan graphic and this next graphic, which shows the different sea levels and their pressure levels. Okay. So first and foremost, because again, this isn't the first time we've gone down to the Titanic. Okay, like we've gone down the Titanic quite a number of times to kind of look at it, see what's there, take pictures. Even I mean, even some people were already trying to pull stuff up. I think it was when I was researching the Titanic. Even in the 80s, people were going down there trying to bring up stuff so they could display it. Um, which I don't know that, this is kind of the little stitious part of me where, you might be bringing bad juju vibes with you, but I'm just, that's a whole nother topic of itself. But okay, we do know the Titanic is at 12,500 feet, which is 3,800 meters underwater. The pressure at that level is 6,000 pounds per square inch, which is PSI. Okay. So already right there, we already knew this. And whoever discovered that, please leave in the comments. I'm not fully familiar. But even still, that's that's a lot of pressure. 6,000 pounds per square inch. Not just overall, per square inch. So you can imagine that, the Titanic at that level is already sitting in that kind of pressure for constant amounts of time. So now we're going to go back to look at the graphic for the Titan, right? So the Titan was made of carbon fiber walls that were 5 inches, so 13 centimeters thick. And the vessel is capped at each end with titanium domes. Okay, so first, titanium can only handle 3,000 pounds per square inch. 3,000. And we're going down to depths where it's 6,000 per square inch. But carbon fiber can handle 820,000 pounds per square inch. So, okay, that's kind of good. That well, I don't know. I'm not trying to under nor over excite that, but that can handle a lot of pressure. But there's a part of this graphic that kind of starts getting the noggin jogging for me. And that is the Titan takes around 2 hours each way to descend and ascend to the Titanic wreck. Okay. And when I was watching the video of no, it wasn't a documentary, but it was an interview. They said they were going to be spending 12 hours. 12. Now, let's do a little common sense thinking for a second. A one-time visit, yeah, I would not think that with the titanium and the carbon fiber combined, it would not have handled going down there, for a one-time visit. I would not. You at that point, if it was the first time ever going down there and that imploded, then that was poorly made. But no, this thing imploded on the 14th trip down there. So now some questions have to be asked, which is how fast were they ascending and descending? Because they say 2 hours, but how fast were they going? Right? Was it, 5 miles per hour for 2 hours? Was it more than that? And, whoever's a scientist and can do the math, please feel free to do that in the comments or send me a message via Twitter, and that'll be fantastic. And I can talk about it in my next video. But just ascending and descending alone, I would think would cause a lot of wear and tear because you're going from one level to the next level, and those levels are varying in terms of pressure. And when we get to subject matter experts, which is my next talking point, there's going to be an interesting quote that we all will add to this kind of thought. Okay. So then not only are you thinking about how fast are they ascending and descending, then you're talking how long they're down there, looking at the debris fields, the ship itself. I hope they weren't going in there. That would have been horrifying in itself. But even still, How long they're down there, that's wear and tear. I mean, I don't want to compare it to a car, but think about a car, right? A car faces a lot of wear and tear when you're, in weather, how often you drive, how far you drive, how well you maintain or not maintain your car. And to me, just from an outsider perspective, and I don't know if they really had a way of maintaining these or if they had a plan of of backups, like backing up like the Titan. So maybe they have the Titan, but there's like a one, two, three, and four, so they can switch them out or whatever. But if they didn't, which it doesn't look like they did, um, and you're expecting to become a commercial enterprise doing this, that was pretty, I want to say ignorant, because you're wearing and tearing a vessel that's going down 12,500 feet at 6,000 pressure, 6,000 pounds of pressure per square inch. It's unfortunate and also not surprising that it did implode. But this kind of leads into my next topic, which is the fact that Rush ignored subject matter experts or SMEs. Quickly, just to let people know what a subject matter expert is like a professional who understands this, right? Like with doctors, you want to go to a heart surgeon. We would consider that a subject matter expert in heart surgery, right? Because that's all they do is heart surgery. Same thing for engineers, depending on what it is. That could be engineering for software, buildings, you name it. They're subject matter experts because that's all they focus on. And I will say, though, this is not the first time that subject matter experts are ignored. Okay. If you've listened to my other podcasts / watched my other videos on YouTube, we know two, actually technically three examples of where subject matter experts are ignored. You first had your FBI VCF, which is the virtual case files program for the FBI. Very quickly, that was where they were updating their case management system. You had the security manager, Matthew Patton, who blew the whistle on what was going on with how the money was being spent, how the work was being done, and the concerns for security and so forth. And what ended up happening was he ended up losing his job and his security clearance. You also had the Challenger space shuttle, where the contracting management with the engineers in the room were saying, no, NASA, we shouldn't really go up there, because not only was the O-rings an issue, there were a lot of other defects with the Challenger space shuttle itself. But then what ended up happening? The contracting management went into a different room with NASA, played their bureaucratic politics, and then came back out and said, oh, there's nothing wrong with this Challenger space shuttle. It is nothing. We're just going to go ahead and proceed with the launch. And unfortunately, we lost lives. Same thing, too, with Apollo 1. Apollo 1, the command service module, the very first one, was filled with flammable material. The door didn't open properly. And the astronauts, who weren't the ones building the module itself, but, kind of had some common sense and said, NASA, what are you doing? Like, we have all this flammable material in here. And you know what ended up happening? During a test, which was like, I want to say a week before they were supposed to launch, caught on fire. And unfortunately, those three men died. When you ignore subject matter experts, you increase your risks, right? You increase your risk of potentially having something go horribly wrong. Not wrong, just beyond that, horribly wrong. And I'm emphasizing that because, again, we see that with the Challenger space shuttle. We saw that with Apollo. Same thing here we saw with the Titan. And again, we have lessons learned, which Rush ignored. We know that. He ignored that. He ignored the lessons learned. He ignored the information that was really there. So, of course, when there was a claim that he had done so much research, I kind of have to call BS on that one. But here from a New York Times article about this, here's a subject matter expert that raised the flag. So it says here, during a trip on board the Titan off the coast of the Bahamas in April 2019, Carl Stanley, an expert in submersibles, knew immediately that something was off. He heard a cracking noise that got only louder over the 2 hours it took for the submersible to plunge more than 12,000 feet. The next day, Mr. Stanley wrote an email in which he detailed his concerns to Stockton Rush, the chief executive of OceanGate Expeditions, who was also on board the Titan for the dive, urging Mr. Rush to cancel the expeditions to the wreck of the Titanic that were planned for that summer of 2019. And this expert also adds a useful thought exercise here would be to imagine the removal of the variables of the investors, the eager mission scientists, your team hungry for success. The press releases were already announcing this summer's dive schedule, wrote Mr. Stanley, according to a copy of the email seen by the New York Times. Imagine this project was self funded and on your own schedule. Would you consider taking dozens of other people to the Titanic before you truly knew the source of the sounds? Now, again, as I said before, this goes beyond investors, stakeholders, risk management, communications, adherence to procedures, scope. This goes way beyond these concepts. This is where, and I talk about this a lot, where people don't keep themselves in check. And I'm also going to talk about this in the next piece of this whole conversation, where we get too deep into the selling of a idea and we don't stop for a minute, right? But we're still talking about subject matter experts. In the fact that your subject matter experts should have more weight in terms of opinion on what should be done next than your stakeholders, your investors and clients. I mean, look at Manhattan Project, for example. The Manhattan Project had I mean, you had the greatest minds like Einstein, Oppenheimer, Niels Bohr, Feynman. You had all these geniuses on one project. I mean, program really, building the atomic bomb. Okay. And the difference between that project and this is that Roosevelt, FDR, listened to his SMEs who said, look, we need to really test before we build it, and then we got to test it again before we can use it, right? And with no allowing any outside influences to take place is why Manhattan Project is an example of a successful project. But again, the Titan is a different case. There was no mentioning of stakeholders and investors because at the end of the day, Stockton could have just said, "You know what? We're going to we need to figure this out." And I am sure with how salesy he was that he could have easily persuaded the stakeholders or whoever was hounding him, quote unquote, to manage their expectations. But this wasn't really about them. This was about him. And of course, this leads into my third point, which is that Stockton is a continuous salesman. And therefore, his own managing of expectations did not take place at all. Not one bit. Nada. Because this guy was hell bent on being the first, and he was going to sell this idea no matter what it took. We have seen people like this in any industry. Let's all be 100% honest with ourselves. We've all seen this kind of person before where they just keep selling, selling, selling. It's the same in project management. There are project managers that do not get out of the proposal phase because in the proposal phase, right, you are trying to sell what you can do for the client, right? Based on what the client's asking you. And so you're sell, 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 sell. You're trying to sell, sell, I have these resources, I have this capability, I can provide you this, I can get this off the shelf product for you. Go down this whole list of ways to persuade a client to say, yup, I'm gonna pick Billy Bob Joe right there. Versus, Doug over here, right? But then what ends up happening is a program manager or even a company in itself wins a project or a program and they don't get out of the proposal mindset. And so then they keep selling the client stuff, constantly selling them, selling them, selling them like, yeah, 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 we can get that done in no time. You don't need to worry, or yeah, 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 you know what, we can add that additional scope, even though it may not align with the business value, but we're just going to do it because yeah, absolutely, no problem. Because the concern is keeping that client's money for as long as possible. Which, yes, it's important to make money because, of course, we're not in the business of doing charity. We're making a profit so we can make money for ourselves and, do whatever we're going to do with it. But there has to come a point where project managers, CEOs, pioneers, you name it, they need to get out of the sales mindset and instead say, okay, now I've got the attention. Now I need to produce, not in a salesy way, but produce and provide what you said you were going to do. Basically, walk your talk. What your proposal is your talk, you now need to walk it. And with Stockton, he was like, I'm just going to do this and I'm going to show that it can be possible and all that stuff, which was great. But he didn't even listen to subject matter experts and kept selling people this idea that, oh, it's safe. Oh, it's fine. Oh, it's not a big deal. Oh, yeah, yeah, it can handle these pressures and all this stuff. When he had people telling him, like, dude, you really shouldn't use these materials because it's going to cause a lot of issues and it might even create a very serious situation. But he didn't listen. He was sell, 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 sell. And I do want to kind of mention the whole thing about the difference between communicating and selling because I think that plays a huge role. And because again, this is not about communication or risk management, this is beyond that. But to be honest, communication, for example, is being honest about what is going on, which I wouldn't say that was the case. He just wanted people to start giving him money so he can say that I'm the first to do this. Whereas he was selling where he was making empty promises that, the thing was safe. But it was the same thing for the Titanic, which is kind of ironic but unfortunate at the same time. But long story short, we don't talk about how to stop people from being salesmen beyond the proposal and start actually being reasonable, commonsensical, strategic project managers that then say, okay, so now I've got the client's attention, I've got the client paying for me to create this product, service, or result. Now I need to do what's right. And I've kind of talked about this before where people need to know when to do the right thing. And this was another one of those things where Stockton didn't do the right thing at all. And again, but that's not a procedure thing. That is just knowing that he had to do the right thing and he didn't. And so my final thoughts are this. As project managers, yes, the PMBOK or the project management body of knowledge is extremely important. It's great guidance. It gives you understanding of what to expect for certain things. But we as project managers also need to go beyond that. We need to go We need to be the project managers who are not only following best practices, but also being strategic in those best practices. Listening, not just listening, kind of actively listening and responding to SMEs. Not in a way to get the SMEs to stop, harping on an issue, but to actually hear what they are telling you, listen, understand, and then address it. And that as project managers, we also need to learn when to get out of the selling proposal phase and become just that. And so, with that, we'll conclude this particular video and podcast. If you would like to further discuss, please do so, but respectfully in the comment section. I would love to hear your all's opinion. If you want to tell me via Twitter as well, you're more than welcome to at PM Corner 06. And I'll be happy to hear your thoughts on that. And I will see you, PM Peeps, in the next video.